particularly sees in the, and that's all represented, all NECA areas across Australia, sees in the scope for the revision, and particularly to introduce a survey which we're looking to gain information from NECA members and contractors generally about their use of the rules as we see it. Just to the next slide. Oh, you're on that one. Okay. The present status of the rules. We're currently enjoying the 13th edition of AS3000, which was published in November 2007. It contains 2 amendments at the moment, and it's available through Standards Australia Global, International Global, for the price of $82 for a special price softcover and $144 for a PDF download. I'll talk more about the availability of the standard in other words in due course. The revision process itself has begun. As I said, we're looking at the 14th edition now, and we've had a meeting of the Standards Australia Committee on the 3rd and 4th of April, where we've dedicated some 2 days to looking at the issues that are involved, collecting opinions of members. We represent a wide variety of the industry, not just electrical contractors. Tried to refine a review of the exercise and to look at how to implement the process there, particularly looking at consultation. As we said, this is an early stage of the exercise. The factors are quite important in the revision process. We need to look at Australia and New Zealand environments. We're particularly looking at the regulatory environment compared to what it's been in the past, commercial environment for our activities, construction activities, to establish some objectives and most of all to justify them and to ensure that once we've established them that we can continue to do it. And lastly, the delivery method, how we present the rules, whether it's the right way, the options that are there. Firstly is the issue of the regulatory environment we're in Australia. Now, installation safety is called up legislation in each state and territory calls up compliance with the wiring rules. That's been the case for many years, since 1976 when Victoria was the last one on board, so it's quite a uniform process. All states and territories in Australia adopt both Part 1 and Part 2 of the rules. That means the fundamentals as well as the practices, which is something I'll talk a bit later again about, as there's an option as to adopting only Parts 1 or Part 2. Licensing competency is also very important, as always called up compliance with the wiring rules. We do have in Australia separate states and territory agencies, and there's a flux exercise there. In previous editions of the rules, sometimes those positions have been quite uniform, but there's a tendency now to destabilisation of some exercise there, or realignment. We're seeing territories, most bodies, being increasingly associated with work health and safety functions. They're involved into Department of Work Covers and IR type issues. Some agencies deliver licensing, some don't. New South Wales doesn't. Some associate, or I should say does, but other states don't. Some associated with network regulation activities. Again, it's not in New South Wales. Most do not carry out inspections but may audit, so there's quite a level of difference in the exercise there. But overall, we have a similar regulatory objective in that calling up requirements for work to comply with the wiring rules, requiring things to be not out of step and the process of that nature there. In New Zealand, the situation is not dissimilar. It's not quite lived up to its promises made in 2000 to line up with Australia, but it delivers its function through building, consumer affairs, licensing, work health and safety as like a one-stop shop there. In New Zealand, it's different than Australia in that it adopts a Part 1 or Part 2 process. So in New Zealand, you only need to apply one or the other, except that for domestic type installations, you must apply Part 2. Part 2 is very particular and specific requirements. Licensing competency calls up 3000. Inspections in New Zealand are very much a third-party issue. They certainly don't do any exercise there. But I would say that we've seen since 2000 probably New Zealand moving away from Australia rather than closer to it in its regulatory functions. In regulation control, or is is not done on a mandatory basis but by a cooperative basis, and that's delivered through what we call ERAC, the Electrical Regulatory Authorities Council, and it gave quite specific directions in 2000 to create a Australian-New Zealand standard and certainly de-prescribe things, align the exercises there. The ERAC direction was also significant in the 2007 edition, which said that the 2000 edition wasn't acceptable to it. So, it's a changing environment. Regulators change, they're not quite constants. We have at the present no indication of the current stance or direction of ERAC in those areas. What we have seen in the last 5 years has been a growth in national work health and safety, and most of you will be familiar with the new regulation and the Act and the Code of Practices associated with electrical installations at workplaces and electrical work. Certainly this has taken over preeminence over what the long-standing electrical installation safety provisions we've had in the past, but it seems it's a whole new world. Most respects, and these are very much a general overview, the previous OH&S requirements have been adopted, reviewed, I'd say reduced, in some cases quite assistance to the exercises there. The new regulations do somewhat surprisingly call up 3012, which is for construction sites, but that much is just taking over what was previously done under separate regulatory controls. The WH&S regulation does call up RCDs for existing higher risk workplaces, and that's something which is, again, covered by the wiring rules, but perhaps not in a retrospective manner, which is what was intended there. In New South Wales, we've had provisions which means that many of the workplaces are looking to implement RCDs, and it's been quite an experience to those. The thing to keep in mind is that that regulation is enforced by agencies such as WorkCover and not by the normal electricity distributor inspection processes there. What we see from this is that there's scope for 3000 to recognise work being performed under WH&S safe conditions, and what that means there's a lot of no live work processes. We can assume now, or take it across Australia in writing standards, that they'll be also working under WH&S regulations which limit live work and things of that type of nature there, as well as safe work methods and all the processes there. National licensing remains on the agenda, and certainly 3000 is called up in that process too. So electricians, whilst I understand that the NOLA system, or the National Occupational Licensing Scheme, is a bit of a sticking point at the moment, it's still looking to be adopted. It's the only way forward realistically to enable people there. So we can expect to see NOLA as the national agency becoming, or having also a potential stakeholder in what's in 3000, because it's a basis for comprehensive licensing. The National Construction Code, or formerly known as the BCA, is also another element which can introduce or incorporate electrical installation requirements. BCA was extended into the NCC in 2011 to include plumbing and drainage services, and so there's been some potential scare there for the ABCB, the Building Code Board, to do the same with electrical services in buildings. That's got some good points as far as you're concerned, and some bad points, but at the moment we're just not getting any communications from ABCB, and we need to take that out. Certainly recognise them as a stakeholder. We've introduced, there are quite a few provisions of the NCC which aren't related to electrical safety and still impact on electrical installations, which we're still incorporating in Appendix E of the 3000 to try to maintain a coordinated and informative role. Network operators, or now electricity distributors, or the processes there. Privatisation of these remains on the agenda, although I hear this morning's news it's not going to happen in Queensland, but there is still the process in New South Wales to consider this and keep that in mind, how we've been structured for the exercise there. Generally, across Australia and New Zealand, electricity distributors still undertake customer safety obligations through inspections and interaction with contractors, which are discussions or arguments or concerns about what interpretation of 3000 is, and what also can be covered by service and installation rules. We see the Energy Networks Association as the peak body for us to work with there rather than to work with all of the declining number of individual electricity distributors. The construction market, certainly these comments in New South Wales, it remains competitive, which in some parts of the exercise, some parts of industry, which means it's stagnant and difficult. And I think that's fairly recognised there, that overseas investment is fairly short at the moment, and our costs of labour and building processes are fairly high. Minimum building standards which including the NCC and the provisions of that, and Green Star and other documentation that imposes on the compliance for building, all at a cost which don't directly relate to the cost to the electrical contractor to perform and don't necessarily recoup from business owners. We've also seen a growth of building safety procedures imposed on contractors, electrical contractors and subcontractors, which we're not quite sure stands up to legal test. Certainly we've seen in larger jobs in Sydney, from my own experience, working with Stow Australia, is that we've seen a transfer of design completion and client acceptance activities to contractors rather than to consultants in the processes there, all of which are trying to minimise the cost to builders, but also increases the risk to contractors. So if we've got risk, we've got to have standards which are clear so we can defend our risk in the exercise there. So if we can comply with the wiring rules, we've got a confidence about that, we've reduced our risk. Lastly, on the environment type issues is international standardisation, and these were a big picture or a big part of the exercise in 2000 and 2007, or realistically the years before that, in preparing those standards. One would have to say that with Europe, the global decline exercise there, Europe has gone into somewhat of a shell and is not doing much in the way of changes exercise there. But it's we still see Australian press and governments come out touting free trade as being a clear ideal for Australia and benefit to Australia. But at the moment it's pretty much one-way traffic as we look at it, all our electrical accessories and electrical equipment all coming in but not going out. From our perspective, a wiring rules perspective, we see this as rather passive process at the moment, not active. We'd be looking to review the IEC documents and process that happens out of France and Germany, and Britain could lead that exercise, but we don't see much coming into changing Australian practices. One of the other factors in our revision process is to also look back. Not that we should stay at the back, but we should be looking forward. We should be understanding where we've come from so that we can go forward with an exercise there. If we look at the last 6 editions of the rules, these are actually the editions I've had direct involvement with, unfortunately, we see that there's been a bit of a trend to try to break out from a rigid Australian-only system into a more global process. 2007 saw us move to directions for regulation in Australia and New Zealand and rationalise that, so the 2-part structure has been created. But that followed on from 2000, where we established or de-prescribed the standard, and we established an IEC alignment, in other words a global process to what constitutes electrical installation safety. That meant that a lot of specialist activities were moved out to other standards, such as 3012, which was construction site, 3017, which is for testing and verification, which became very important to contractors being self-testing activities and exercise there, and moving away from inspections and process there, 3018 being a standalone domestic installation. But prior to that, the previous additions to that took on a basically evolving editorial and technical role to try to move towards and reflect what industry was asking us to do. We've certainly seen more pictures, we've taken efforts to make sure people are clear that it's an environment which we're in. So looking at those issues and have considered that background, the committee, one, basically put itself some questions to itself, objectives in the revision. Basically, do we need the standard? Do we need it to be revised? Do we keep the current framework or we look for a new model? What time frame should we be looking at, and what can be improved? So on those issues, the first one, do we need 3000? The answer is basically that we see is yes. There is certainly a very well entrenched regulation process there, which will take some years to change, even if there's a will to change it. But it remains as a required standard, and there won't be changing in the foreseeable future. We certainly see there's more national agencies becoming involved and who may have quite different views than traditional electricity distribution or ownership agencies. Do we need a new revision? For the most part, most of the committee felt that it's not necessarily we need it, but we could always do it, particularly if there's issues such as new work, materials, methods, or existing practices are unsuitable. Do we keep the current framework or begin the large task of looking for a new model? Well, the answer we reached was we'd maintain the current framework. We've got nobody at the moment pushing us to change it. That could change, of course. We believe the model remains acceptable and flexible to most parties, and allows for regulators, network operators and contractors to change or modify processes as they see it in their own different regions. We don't want to see them moving away, but the wiring rules effectively binds rather than fractures the process. What time frame? Certainly we don't think it's an urgent process. We see that we can amend things if necessary. The Standards Australia are not suggesting we need to do more than a 10-year life frame, and I'm putting those words into their mouth. They probably like to see the standard revised every 5 years, but 10 years is quite acceptable. We believe we should publish when we've reached a certain level of amendment, if you like. What can't be improved? There's always people ready to criticise what's there, but it's getting the suggestions of what to improve and where we should improve is difficulties. The committee's established, or is thinking of establishing, a focus on common electrical work, or what a common electrician uses in the wiring rules, and that'll be part of this survey questions I'm going to ask you. Not so much restricting it to that common electrical work, because the wiring rules, as I said, covers all types of electrical installation, but do it in a way where we've got a level of intelligibility, consistency for those that want to readily understand it and follow on from their training exercises there. We believe we should adopt a safe as reasonably practical test, and as opposed to a safe as humanly possible, and this reflects what's in the WH, and it's a process there. We believe if you take on board the training that people have, the requirements for safe work and work itself, then you should produce something which somebody of that competency should be able to interpret and regard as safe, rather than taking the worst possible situation, covering everything and therefore penalising by cost and other association there. We need to have a prompt and consistent response to inquiries. In other words, the committee or the process of the standard needs to deliver a quick answer, not a 6-month answer to the exercise. And we also need to properly research and record the intention of changes. So that's a role of the committee or from standards that we see as important there. NECA representatives on the committee, which include Western Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland is represented also in the contracting sector, has been to basically support the view that common electrical work needs to be as clear as possible. Needs to be no mistakes, because mistakes cost us, but we need to ensure that larger projects are not forgotten. So we need to have our alternative practices. We need to make sure that we as clear as possible what constitutes unsafe activities, rather than trying to define safety in some respects. We also believe that it's a competitive business out there, and the cost of change, if not properly researched, can be unproductive and just nobody benefits from it. We're unlikely to recover costs some activities these days from builders and clients. We're all supposed to know that the standard has changed and know the exercise there. NECA would like to ensure that Standards Australia provides the resources to research and produce the document. This is a bit of a comment I'll make again later. We need to be right in that exercise there. We support rules aimed at achieving safe as practicable. As said before, we see a long life of the standard as acceptable. 10 years doesn't worry us particularly. It could be longer as exercises. The basic safety concerns we've outlined don't really change. We therefore view the committee's view that we should be developing the revision along the lines of amendment to the existing model, preferable to an overhaul. So, exercise there. The committee then has established principles for the revision, and these are all early days, I should say. These are the things we'd like to see people, as a result of our activities and NECA's input, may review this, but I think the principles are in everybody's interests. Firstly, we see they are based on amending rather than revising. So we've got keep our structure and we look at the rule and improve it. We can clarify rather than change direction. In other words, we're not, one day it's black, we want everything to be black. We don't want it to be white the next edition because it'll be black again the next edition after that, or probably grey. Informed by illustration rather than words is a technique we see as have been developed and should continue to do so. Probably by means of photographic type material as well would probably assist. And also to evaluate the costs of any changes before any additions are made. So we need to consider it. It doesn't overrule it, of course, but considering the exercise there. Some technical aspects have been raised. These have been raised back to, in part sometimes, in preparation of the 2007 edition or even amendments thereof. There's some additions which are new requirements, alterations, changes to existing, and some things we consider there's no change required, which is probably making it more of the calculations and technical provisions that aren't applicable to common works, keeping those. From an additions point of view, some things have been flagged, which is supply systems which are not MEM. There's some interesting DC systems, some non-neutral type arrangements and things like that coming in. These might be more of the technical higher end of the market, but there may be some implications in the standard as well, which could benefit from simple on-site substation type activities. VSD, VVF motor drives, variable speed equipment has got raising a few concerns, or rather non-50 hertz type safety shock issues, but high frequency concerns and the potential for the environments there, and particularly looking at earthing and bonding structures to achieve that. Electrical vehicles are something new on the market, and there's been a fair bit of money being expended trying to assess what the installation provisions should be made for vehicles in commercial street side locations. So we've got some input onto that, and we'd see that coming in. Also, age-assisted living, that certainly becomes something, making installations or safety requirements for the elderly, or as it grows, and the growing community that exists there and exercise there. Safety services in 7.2 has got a number of things we're looking at needing a revamp, as these relate to a lot of other committees and things there considering changes. So we've got WS wiring systems, which is the fire-rated cable trays. We need to do something on those. We're looking at amending that standard shortly. Lifts and the National Construction Code have changed slightly regarding lifts some lifts not being regarded as safety services. Fire pumps, there's been some enhancements. Sprinklers and smoke control equipment all being rationalised in terms of WS systems. Generation systems, big area we think of looking at here, we've refined in through 2007 and in each amendment since. We've introduced new drawings and pictures of grid-connected PV or other standby systems. We're certainly looking at those as being an important part. There's been a lot of activity from the Clean Energy Council on Grid Connect and how to do it correctly, and very, very detailed. We need to use the wiring rules to assist linking to that and providing contractors with that information should they be in that process there. 3010 standby plant is undergoing normal review. Some minor matters that we look at, had some ongoing changes in Amendment 2 with cable colours and some concern about that. Mechanical protection's always been a bane. Private substations, not really MEN, but we need to try to tidy that up there. Earth fault loop impedance has created some misconceptions and difficulties. Appendix C, whether we put cable sizes for domestic installations, including a review of thermal insulation. We're looking at reviewing that. Service protection devices, there are certainly different ways of doing these in different parts of the country, and we see that there'd be some benefit of rationalising and perhaps assisting ENA to try to make sure that we don't do one thing in one state which is contrary to others. Taking things out of the service rules which are installation and making sure they're reflected in the wiring rules we think is also important. And additions and alterations to existing installations raises many questions about how far you need to go if you're adding a power, not just adding a PowerPoint, but what parts of the rules should tidy up those. We've got quite a few aspects we see which aren't fully understood, which would probably fall into this category of tidying up or improving. Part 1, the role of Part 1, overcurrent protection is regarded as many as technically complicated, things like discrimination and exercise there. Switchboard construction, form of construction is very important. We're seeing a lot more of that coming in Form 3Bs and the expectation of those and understanding that. Voltage drop, current carrying capacity, when to go to alternatives. Earthing conductor sizes, how to simplify that, and fault loop impedance I mentioned before. Matters which we've also looked at and felt that we should be careful of including things like EMF, health and the interference issue at 50 Hertz. There's some concerns there. We believe it's best to leave that to the specialist areas and not try wiring rules to try to be used as a vehicle. Over voltage protection or surge protection, lightning protection systems are not a requirement of the rules, but we do prepared to assist to ensure that if you are installing it, that how to install it correctly, and there's quite a bit of dispute amongst the suppliers about what's the correct way to do it. Obviously their product is the best product, each of them, and similarly that follows on to what we call safer safety products, things like PPE and some other things that are coming in which are being touted as being better than the others, any other system, and should therefore be used throughout. Technical editorial concerns. Certainly we believe that the overall motherhood statement of promoting installation practices that are safe, fit for purpose, common, cost-effective are all sensible and exercise there. Testing what we put in terms of that it's safe if it's done this way, but not unsafe if it's done another way, and exercises there need to be recognised. We, as I mentioned before, WH&S risk assessment, safe work methods, no live work, all underpin requirements that we do in the exercises there. Our clause style would remain as deemed to comply method with alternative permitted, which does look a bit like the building code. We're thinking of incorporating a reason for the rule, so in other words, preliminary statements that in order to protect or prevent or achieve something, you must do this, to at least provide an indication to people about what the purpose of the rule is and therefore reduce misinterpretations. Illustrations and photographs are another kind of way of trying to show things perhaps not entirely in the rule itself. The format size of the rules always come up for discussion, and in that respect this is no different, but it's more likely now, as we see in Standards Australia, what it's prepared to deliver. There will be a common A4 size. Downloadables probably is going to be a preference for the exercise there, and will still remain as one standard. As it's updated or amended, those amendments would be produced. So rather than the A5 version now blown up to A4, it'll be A4 paginated, and you can print it however you wish as you download it. Standards Australia is in terms of the delivery method. There is no real scope, as we see, to change that exercise there. We just need to make Standards Committee process and the Standards Australia processes more effective. Standards Australia is no longer a, how to say it, cost, free service. The exercise there, it's competitive. It's no longer a not-for-profit organisation. It hasn't. That's the way it's been for several years. It hasn't got the resources that we've had in the past, and it requires, as you can see in the product outcomes at the end of the day, which are produced by its agency, the printing SAIG, that it's not necessarily a cheap standard. We don't see, in the processes we work to with standards, involve quite a bit of preliminary assessment, net benefit analysis or cost benefit analysis, preparation, 6 months to obtain approval for projects. All in all, not entirely the best process, but it is entrenched and is one that we will probably stay with at this stage there. We are looking to establish the project as a revision, but developed as an amendment, so there will be public reviews, and that is the benefits of the full standards process. There has been some thought to be a bit creative in the exercise for the wiring rules, and looking around, we're looking at Standards Australia investigating an app type process there. The building code has an illustrated version. Unfortunately, the building code changes every year, so they need to update it every year, but it would be a linked process there where we have the standard with links to illustrations, explanation, examples that the committee might have given, word searching, content exporting, things you can take out of the exercise, so as well as access to previous editions. So in other words, making it a full what the rule said before, what it says now, why it says it, will help to those the exercise there. Such an app would take quite a bit of development activity, but we certainly can run parallel with the normal standard exercises there. We also think the wiring rules could follow on from that. We would add FAQs into it, some commentary parts of the exercise there, trade compliance paperwork we think is fairly useful, links to what your local distributor wants you to, an application for supply, a notification of compliance and things of that type of nature on a region by region basis. And that would also allow for different regulatory agencies, safety agencies to put in more information, which would make the wiring rules a much more live application. A quick recap then, basically before we get to the survey aspect. We're certainly looking to amend the standard rather than revise it, keeping it a familiar product covering familiar ground, some new material and improvements, the delivery process to be improved if we can, but pretty much the same. We don't seem to, and when it will happen, it may be progressive. We may have an amendment in 2015, but the final major version might be around 2017, so kind of current programming there. But if we have a significant part of the standard available to amendment, say we look at something on our PV systems, then we'll issue those as a full amendment, and that can be incorporated in the current document. Okay, that brings us to what our main purpose of today. And we're looking to use this example for you to express your view, or to get to distribute to others who are able to provide a view on what they're dealing with the wiring rules is, as a means to contribute to ensure the standard is effective. So we're looking to gather that exercise there. So what we've have produced is a simple survey form, which we'll send out to all parties who are participating, all of you out there who are participating in this, as well as we're looking to circulate it through other vehicles such as NEEC and use and get to the exercise there. What we're interested in is what do you or don't you use in the rules? What do or don't you consider important? What do you think needs more work? What makes the standard easier to use, and what are other standards and processes there? The first part of the survey is dealing with your background. Again, we don't need your name or the exercises there, just how long you've spent in the industry as an employer or employee, how many editions of the standard you're familiar with. That'll tell us how old you are. How did you receive the training, and how did you keep informed of changes? These are things which we always want to do there. So your usage pattern of the rules, we tried to structure this down in the different parts of the rules, like how often do you use the section, frequent to you don't use it at all, and they're very important. Some of those things are there for us in understanding where we should put our focus. Whether you think those sections are easy to understand, whether straightforward or it needs improvement, the exercise. whether some of them are more technically challenging than others, like some of the provisions regarding overcurrent protection and selection of switchgear, whether that you believe that's within your trade skills background, or whether it's acceptable or it's difficult, or we need to remove or simplify it in exercise there. Again, these are your opinions, or if you send the survey on to others, whoever fills the form in, his opinions there. Another part of the exercise is we're queried often about other standards. Now, the wiring rules doesn't exist alone to cover all installations. There are a range of standards, specialist in nature, which we're also looking to have an involvement with. Obviously 3008 is quite a big part if you're doing commercial size or any large size cable selection processes. 3012 construction sites is very important for anything dealing with our work cover relationships there. Even the building code, for instance, we're interested in how you use that or whether you refer to that as we try to assist the exercise there. There's some large activities in those. So again, are they frequently used? Are they difficult to use? We've had a few concerns about 3003 about difficulty and technicalities there, and feedback into that would be very useful. The other aspect is there's subjects that need to be extended to meet your contract, your needs. Whilst this part of the form is fairly empty, as you can see there, there's a few leads there. We're really interested in what the other suggestions you might want to make, things that you feel need to be covered that aren't covered at the moment, things which are covered incorrectly. So if you think it's of low importance to do something, needs to be done up to very desirable, it's a simple numbering system, a 1, 2, 3 type system. Lastly, on the revision, or nearly the last thing, revision outcomes itself, what we should try to achieve. Some of the things I've talked about today in the seminar is to say, do you think these comments are relevant to us? I mean, it might seem to be a bit self-seeking, I suppose, but we do value what people do see there, supporting what observations that NECA members, NECA representatives are making there. So it covers a range of things like the present model, the common work, keep as safe as practicable, evaluate the costs. They're all probably things that we think to certainly average to high importance to do, but you might, in your experience or background, think we should be focusing on something different. And those comments are welcome. Lastly is your preference for the style and the access. Do you think the move to A4 is best for us? Illustrations, incorporation reasons for the exercise. Develop the app. If you think that's very interesting and you do use it, or you would use it, then support of that would certainly give us a bit more stimulus to prod Standards Australia to do some resources into that idea there. Of course, if you've got any other suggestions, that would also be useful for us. The survey itself is, as I said, we'll be sending it out to you electronically. It'll be in Word format to try to make sure you can get fit as much as you like in, and then add to it the exercise there. And after you've completed it, if we could get you to send it to one of the 2 addresses, that would be appreciated. So that's the end of the formal part of the exercises there in the presentation today. I hope that's acceptable to you. If you have some questions, we can look at those, or I'll talk with NECA here, representative here, is how we might best communicate if you have any particular questions coming up at the moment.
This is Oliver. If you've got some questions, there's a button on your dashboard to raise your hand, and if you click that, I can unlock your microphone and you can ask the questions live, or alternatively you can type a question and we'll receive it at this end and respond to it.
Do you have one of them? No. Do you want me to talk to that one? We have a question from Richard, or a comment from Richard, let's say. Richard's made the view that, if you can't see it or not, is that the current edition has been the worst of all the editions, in his opinion there. Well, Thanks for that, Richard. It's another way to handle exercises there. Well, we are interested in certainly trying to understand why we think that's a bad, why it is the worst edition, or what parts or aspects of it. So we appreciate any comment you can have in the survey form, just clarify some of those conditions there. So. Okay, well, if that's there's no questions arising, then obviously you've got my email address on the end of the seminar there, and I'll be happy to take, as NECA's New South Wales representative on the committee, I'll take any inquiries you have out of the exercise there, and we look forward to hearing from you completing the survey. Thank you very much.